Picture this: 2,000 years ago, in the heart of the sprawling Parthian Empire, a skilled artisan carefully seals a small iron rod inside a clay jar, surrounding it with a copper cylinder and filling the vessel with a mysterious liquid. To them, it was perhaps just another day's work, a simple object for a purpose long forgotten. They could never have imagined that this unassuming jar would one day lie buried in the sands of time, only to be unearthed and ignite a controversy that would challenge our entire understanding of ancient innovation. This isn't a scene from a fantasy novel. This is the origin story of one of archaeology's most baffling and hotly debated artifacts, the Baghdad Battery. Its very existence asks a question so profound it shakes the foundations of history as we know it. Did an ancient civilization, centuries before figures like Volta or Galvani were even born, stumble upon the principles of electricity? The discovery of this object doesn't just add a footnote to our history books, it threatens to rewrite entire chapters, suggesting a level of technological sophistication we never dared to attribute to the ancient world. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that our timeline of human invention might be incomplete, that flashes of genius may have illuminated the past long before we thought possible, only to be extinguished and lost for millennia. This isn't merely about an old pot, it's a gateway into re-evaluating the ingenuity of our ancestors, a puzzle box from the past waiting to be unlocked. Finding this artifact was as much a matter of chance as it was of careful digging. It was in the 1930s, during excavations near the ancient city of Ctesiphon, just south of modern-day Baghdad, that this peculiar arrangement of clay, copper, and iron came to light. The initial assumption was mundane. Perhaps it was a storage vessel for sacred scrolls, a common enough find, but the components were too specific, too deliberate. An iron rod, intentionally isolated from a copper cylinder by an asphalt plug, all housed within a terracotta pot. It was a configuration that immediately stood out to Wilhelm König, the German archaeologist who first studied it in detail. His mind didn't go to scrolls or spices, it went to chemistry, to the basic principles of a galvanic cell. The pieces seemed to fit a startling theory. If filled with an acidic electrolyte like vinegar or wine, this simple jar could have produced a small but measurable electric current. Imagine the implications of that thought. While the classical world was building aqueducts and amphitheaters, could someone in Mesopotamia have been harnessing a force that wouldn't be formally understood for another 1,800 years? The very idea is both exhilarating and deeply unsettling, suggesting a parallel path of discovery that was somehow abandoned or forgotten. So, what are we to make of this ancient relic? Was it truly a primitive battery, used for electroplating jewelry or for some kind of religious ritual that involved a mysterious tingling sensation? Or is this a classic case of modern minds projecting our own knowledge onto the past, seeing patterns where none were intended? The debate is fierce, with compelling arguments on both sides. Skeptics point to the lack of wires, the absence of any contemporary descriptions of electrical devices, and the fact that a single battery producing barely a volt of power would have had limited practical use. Proponents, however, argue that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. They ask us to consider the possibility that this was a prototype, a forgotten branch of science that never fully blossomed. As we embark on this journey together, we're not just examining an artifact, we're exploring the very nature of historical discovery. We'll delve into the moment of its finding, analyze the most compelling theories for its purpose, and weigh the passionate arguments from both believers and skeptics. Prepare to have your perception of ancient history challenged, because the story of the Baghdad Battery is a reminder that the past is rarely as simple as it seems, and that sometimes the most profound mysteries are hidden in the most ordinary-looking objects. The year was 1936, a time when the sands of Iraq were yielding incredible treasures from bygone empires. It was in this landscape of ancient history that German archaeologist Wilhelm König, working near a village called Qujat Rabu just southeast of Baghdad, made a discovery that would baffle experts for decades to come. The object itself was not particularly grand or ornate, especially when compared to the glittering gold and intricate sculptures often associated with archaeological digs. It was a simple 5-inch tall terracotta jar, the kind that might have held oil, water, or grain. At first glance, it seemed utterly ordinary, and it would have been easy to catalogue it as just another domestic item from the Parthian period, which spanned from around 250 B.C. to 224 A.D. The initial, most logical assumption was that this clay pot had been used to store important scrolls, perhaps religious texts or legal documents, sealed shut to protect them from the elements. After all, what else could such a jar be for? But König was a meticulous observer, and as he examined the artifact more closely, its true peculiarity began to emerge. It wasn't just a jar, it was a sophisticated assembly of distinct components. Inside the clay vessel was a carefully rolled copper cylinder, sealed at the bottom with a cap made of pure copper. Through the center of this cylinder ran an iron rod, isolated from the copper by a thick, carefully fitted plug of asphalt or bitumen. This asphalt plug was the key that transformed the object from a simple container into a deliberate construction. It wasn't just a lid, it was an insulator strategically placed to keep the iron rod from touching the copper cylinder. This specific combination of materials, copper, iron, and an acidic electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice that could have been contained within the jar, immediately sparked a revolutionary idea in König's mind. He recognized that this arrangement mirrored the basic components of an electrochemical cell. The copper and iron would act as electrodes, the electrolyte as a conductive medium, and the asphalt as a crucial insulator to prevent a short circuit. This was not a random assortment of items thrown into a pot. Every piece had a deliberate role, suggesting a level of intentional design that went far beyond simple storage. The very presence of the asphalt plug, a material that would have required effort to acquire and shape, indicated that its function was critical to the object's purpose. This unassuming jar from Qujat Rabu was beginning to look less like a library for scrolls and more like a carefully engineered device, a silent relic hinting at a forgotten spark of ancient genius. Wilhelm König was no ordinary observer casually sifting through artifacts. As the director of the National Museum of Iraq, he brought a seasoned scholar's eye and a deep understanding of the region's material culture to the table. His fascination with this particular jar grew not from a wild imagination, but from a methodical analysis of its physical properties. He saw the deliberate construction, the copper cylinder acting as one potential terminal, the iron rod as another, and the asphalt plug serving the critical function of an insulator. To König, this wasn't just a storage container, it was a system. His revolutionary hypothesis, first formally proposed in a paper around 1940, was as simple as it was breathtaking. He theorized that if this jar were filled with an acidic liquid commonly available in the ancient world, such as vinegar, fermented grape juice, or even lemon juice, the entire assembly would function as a basic galvanic cell. The acidic electrolyte would react with the two dissimilar metals, causing electrons to flow from the iron rod to the copper cylinder through the liquid, thereby generating a small but consistent electric current. It wouldn't have been a massive jolt of power, perhaps just over 1 volt, but it would have been a veritable spark of electricity, a phenomenon that would not be formally discovered in the Western world for another 18 centuries. But why would anyone in antiquity need a small electrical current? König didn't just stop at identifying the potential for power. He proposed a practical application rooted in existing archaeological evidence. He pointed to the existence of fine gold-plated artifacts from the same period and region. The conventional explanation for this plating was a technique called fire gilding, which used mercury and was extremely dangerous. König suggested an alternative, electroplating. He posited that several of these batteries could have been linked together in a series to produce a higher voltage. An artisan could then dip a small object, like a silver statuette, into a solution containing gold salts and connect it to the battery. The electrical current would cause the gold particles to gently and evenly bond to the silver surface, creating a flawless, durable plating without the toxic fumes of mercury. This wasn't a fantastical notion of ancient power grids. It was a plausible, small-scale industrial or artistic use for a technology that was perfectly within the grasp of skilled craftspeople. The radical nature of this idea cannot be overstated. When König published his theory, the accepted historical timeline placed the invention of the battery firmly in the year 1800 with Alessandro Volta and his voltaic pile. To suggest that a civilization from the Parthian or even earlier Sassanian period, centuries before the fall of Rome, had not only understood the principle but had also created a working device was to challenge the very foundations of the history of science. It implied that a thread of technological knowledge had been spun, used, and then completely lost for over 1,000 years. This out-of-place artifact forced a profound question. Was our understanding of human progress linear and cumulative, or could it be punctuated by flashes of advanced insight that flickered and died, only to be independently rediscovered much later? König's battery theory transformed the humble clay jar from an archaeological curiosity into a profound historical riddle, one that continues to pit the thrill of possibility against the rigorous demands of empirical proof. Of course, such a revolutionary idea was bound to face intense scrutiny, and the mainstream archaeological community responded with a powerful wave of skepticism. The biggest hurdle for the battery theory is a profound and undeniable silence. While we have extensive records from the ancient world detailing everything from medical treatments to complex construction techniques, there is a complete absence of any written description, illustration, or even a vague reference to anything resembling electrical power. No cuneiform tablet speaks of a spark from a jar. No philosophical text ponders the nature of this mysterious force, and no artisan's manual outlines the steps for connecting the copper vessels. For a technology that would have been truly revolutionary, its total omission from the historical record is deafening. Furthermore, if these were indeed batteries, where are the accessories? A functioning electrochemical cell requires a complete circuit. To do anything useful like electroplating, one would need wires or conductors to carry the current from the jar to the object being plated. Yet, no such wires, whether made of metal, carbonized thread, or any other conductive material, have ever been found in association with these jars. We haven't discovered a single example of a Baghdad battery with anything attached to it, nor have we found any tools or devices that look like they were designed to utilize an electrical current. It's like finding what looks like a light bulb, but with no socket, no switch, and no power lines anywhere in the ancient city. This lack of peripheral evidence is a major strike against the practical use theory. A third point of contention is the sheer isolation of these objects. Only a handful of these specific jars have ever been identified, perhaps around a dozen. If this was a known and utilized technology, even for specialized ritual or craft purposes, we would expect to find many more examples, or at least variations on the design, scattered across the region. Instead, they appear as anomalies, which makes it much more likely they served a unique, non-technological function that was simply lost to time. So, if they weren't batteries, what were they? The most widely accepted alternative explanation is far more mundane, yet still fascinating in its own right. Many archaeologists propose that these were simply storage containers for sacred or important scrolls. In this scenario, the iron rod was the core around which a valuable papyrus or parchment scroll was carefully wrapped for protection. The copper cylinder would have acted as a sturdy protective case, and the asphalt plug served as an airtight seal to keep out moisture and insects, preserving the fragile document inside. Over centuries, the organic scroll material would have completely decomposed, leaving behind only the durable metal and clay components. The iron rod, now corroded and fused in place, gives the appearance of a deliberate component when it might have just been a practical spindle. This explanation fits neatly within the archaeological context of the time, requiring no lost technology or forgotten scientific principles. It suggests that we are not looking at an ancient power source, but rather a sophisticated ancient filing cabinet. Faced with this compelling yet controversial hypothesis, the scientific community did what it does best. It decided to test it. Rather than letting the debate rage solely in academic papers, researchers and enthusiastic hobbyists set out to answer the question with their hands, building functional replicas to see if the ancient jar could truly live up to its modern nickname. One of the earliest and most famous of these experiments was conducted in the 1940s by an American engineer named Willard Gray. After learning of König's theory, Gray was intrigued enough to construct his own precise copy of the Baghdad Battery. He filled his replica not with a modern chemical solution, but with a substance readily available in antiquity, grape juice. The result was startlingly successful. His simple clay, copper, and iron cell generated a measurable electrical current, somewhere between 1.5 and 2 volts. This was a pivotal moment. It demonstrated conclusively that the object's design was not just theoretically sound, but practically functional. It proved that the ancient artisans, whether by intention or accident, had created a device capable of producing electricity. In the decades since Gray's pioneering experiment, numerous others have followed suit, often with more sophisticated measuring equipment but the same fundamental curiosity. Modern recreations have experimented with a variety of electrolytes that would have been known to the Parthians or Sassanians, including vinegar, wine, and even lemon juice. The results are consistently the same. A low, steady voltage is produced, enough to create a faint tingling sensation on the tongue, or more scientifically, to be registered clearly by a voltmeter. Some experimenters have gone a step further, connecting several of these replica jars together in a series, effectively creating an ancient battery pack. By linking the positive terminal of one cell to the negative of the next, they have managed to amplify the voltage to 5 volts or more. This stacked configuration has allowed for even more dramatic demonstrations, such as powering a small light-emitting diode or even electroplating a thin layer of silver onto a copper medallion. These modern tests provide a powerful visual and practical proof of concept, showing that the Baghdad Battery could have been used for a tangible, if simple, task. However, these successful experiments also bring the core of the skepticism into sharper focus. While the battery undeniably works, its limitations are just as telling as its capabilities. A single cell produces a very weak current, insufficient for any significant application. Even when multiple cells are linked together, the amount of usable power is minimal and short-lived, as the electrolyte would be depleted relatively quickly and the metals would corrode. This raises the critical question of practicality. If the ancient users understood the principle of electricity well enough to create the battery, why did they not refine it? Why is there no evidence of larger-scale versions or of devices designed to harness this power more efficiently? The experimental evidence confirms the possibility, but it doesn't necessarily confirm the practice. It shows that the artifact can function as a battery, but it doesn't definitively prove that this was its intended purpose. The experiments brilliantly bridge the gap between ancient design and modern theory, yet they leave us standing on the edge of the same historical mystery, now armed with the certain knowledge that the spark was there, waiting to be discovered, but still unsure if anyone in the distant past ever truly saw its light. This brings us to the most compelling and widely discussed theory for why such an ancient battery might have been created: the art of electroplating. Imagine an artisan's workshop in the bustling city of Seleucia, the air thick with the smell of clay and metal. A skilled craftsperson seeks to transform a simple silver pendant into an object of dazzling gold, but the traditional method, fire gilding, is a dangerous dance with toxic mercury vapors. Instead, they reach for a series of these curious clay jars linked together with simple wire. They immerse the pendant in a solution containing gold salts and connect it to their humble power source. Over hours, an almost magical transformation occurs as microscopic particles of gold are coaxed from the solution to bond seamlessly with the silver surface, creating a flawless, durable, and beautiful gilded finish. This scenario isn't just science fiction, it's a practical application that aligns perfectly with the battery's low voltage. Electroplating doesn't require a powerful jolt. It needs a gentle, consistent current, exactly what a series of Baghdad batteries could provide. The process would have been safer and potentially yielded a more even, high-quality result than the risky mercury-based alternative, offering a tantalizing explanation for the exquisite gilded artifacts we've unearthed. Indeed, the archaeological record from the region does contain objects that make this hypothesis feel surprisingly plausible. We have examples of fine silver artifacts from Mesopotamia that are delicately plated with a thin layer of gold. The conventional explanation for these items has always been fire gilding, a technique certainly known to ancient metalworkers, but proponents of the electroplating theory point to the exceptional quality and uniformity of the gold layer on some of these pieces. They argue that achieving such a perfect, consistent coating with mercury would have been incredibly difficult, whereas electroplating naturally produces an even distribution. The very existence of these gilded objects proves that the desired outcome, a silver object with a gold appearance, was a valued craft. The battery, therefore, could represent the tool that made this craft possible, a lost technology that explains the high quality of the surviving artwork. It paints a picture of ancient scientists and artists working hand in hand, using a fundamental discovery of electrochemistry to achieve aesthetic wonders. However, this elegant theory faces a formidable challenge from the very same archaeological record it uses for support. If electroplating was a known and practiced technique, even as a specialized artisanal secret, we would expect to find clear physical evidence for it on the plated objects themselves. Modern scientific analysis of ancient metalwork using techniques like scanning electron microscopy can detect the telltale signs of different gilding methods. Fire gilding leaves a specific metallurgical signature, often involving a mercury-gold amalgam. Electroplating, by contrast, creates a distinct interface where the gold layer meets the base metal. When experts have examined these ancient gilded silver artifacts, the evidence consistently points to traditional techniques like fire gilding or mechanical methods such as foil application. To date, not a single artifact from the Parthian or Sassanian periods has been conclusively shown to have been electroplated. The absence of this smoking gun is a significant hole in the hypothesis. If this was the battery's primary purpose, why have we not found a single object that bears its unique fingerprint? Furthermore, the logistical hurdles of using these batteries for a production environment are considerable. As the modern replicas have shown, a single cell produces a very weak current. To achieve a voltage sufficient for effective plating, an artisan would need to create and maintain a bank of perhaps 10 or 12 jars, all connected in series with conductive wires, materials we have no evidence for. The process would have been slow, possibly taking many hours or even days to plate a small object, and the electrolyte would need to be regularly replenished as it became depleted. When compared to the established, if dangerous, method of fire gilding, which was faster and required less specialized equipment, the proposed electroplating setup begins to look inefficient. This raises a critical question. Why would an ancient workshop go through the complex trouble of creating and maintaining these delicate electrochemical cells when a proven, albeit hazardous, technique was already available and mastered? The electroplating hypothesis offers a brilliant and intuitive explanation for the battery's existence, but it remains a theory trapped between the tantalizing realm of possibility and the stubborn lack of concrete archaeological proof. If electroplating seems like a practical, almost industrial application, then the next theory transports us into the realm of the mystical and the medical. Let's venture away from the artisan's workshop and into the dimly lit chambers of an ancient temple. Here, the purpose of the Baghdad Battery shifts from adorning metal to interacting with the human body itself. What if the small current it produced wasn't meant for objects but for people? This line of thinking opens the door to the fascinating possibility of ancient electrotherapy. We know from historical records that various ancient cultures, including the Greeks and Romans, experimented with the natural world's strange phenomena for healing. They used electric fish like the torpedo ray, which can deliver a substantial jolt to treat conditions like gout and headaches. The Greek physician Scribonius Largus in the 1st century A.D. documented precisely this, prescribing the numbing shock from a ray to alleviate pain. If the concept of using electricity for therapeutic relief was known, even if from a biological source, then the idea that a civilization like the Parthians could have created a controlled, repeatable source of a mild shock is not so far-fetched. A priest or healer could have used the battery to generate a gentle tingling sensation, perhaps applied to sore muscles or aching joints, offering a novel form of treatment that would have seemed nothing short of miraculous to those who experienced it. This leads us directly to an even more captivating idea, the tingling god theory. Imagine a powerful religious ceremony. A devout individual seeking answers or blessings is instructed to grasp a metal object, perhaps a statue of a deity. Unbeknownst to them, the statue is connected by a hidden wire to one of these batteries. On the priest's command, a hidden assistant completes the circuit, and the worshipper feels a mysterious, unexpected vibration or a faint buzz in their hand. In that moment, the priest has seemingly demonstrated a direct conduit to the divine, making the statue itself come alive with a strange, unearthly energy. This kind of ritualistic trickery would have been an incredibly powerful tool for maintaining religious authority and inspiring awe. We have numerous examples throughout history of priests and oracles using hidden mechanics, acoustics, and chemistry to create seemingly supernatural effects, from the whispering statues of ancient temples to the steam-powered miracles of the hero of Alexandria. Using a Baghdad battery to produce a tangible, unexplainable sensation would fit perfectly into this long tradition of using emerging knowledge to reinforce spiritual belief. The effect wouldn't need to be strong or painful. Even a subtle, unfamiliar tingling would be enough to convince someone of a divine presence. Yet, for all its narrative appeal, this theory shares the same fundamental weakness as the others, a complete lack of direct evidence. No ancient text describes a medical treatment involving a shock from a jar. No temple fresco depicts a priest holding wires connected to a clay pot. While the use of electric fish is well documented, that evidence comes from the Mediterranean world, not from Mesopotamia. There is no clear link between those practices and the specific culture that produced the Baghdad Battery. The tingling god theory, while imaginative, relies on a chain of assumptions that the batteries were used in temples, that priests understood how to create a circuit, and that they chose to use this knowledge for deception rather than exploration. It's a compelling story, but it remains a story unsupported by the archaeological record. What we are left with then is a pattern of intriguing parallels rather than conclusive proof. The very fact that later civilizations independently discovered the therapeutic potential of electricity suggests that the underlying concept is not alien to human curiosity. The pervasive use of ritual and illusion in religious practices across all cultures makes the tingling god scenario feel universally plausible. The Baghdad Battery sits at the center of these possibilities, a silent object that aligns with known human behaviors but refuses to confirm any of them. It's this tantalizing gap between the artifact's demonstrated capability and the absence of any context for its use that keeps the mystery alive. We can see what it could have done, but we may never know what it was done for, leaving us to ponder whether we are looking at a forgotten medical tool, a priest's clever prop, or something else entirely that we have not yet even considered. This uncertainty surrounding the battery's purpose is further complicated by a fundamental question that lies at the very heart of the mystery: just how old is it? To understand an artifact's true significance, we must first be able to place it accurately on the timeline of history. And here, the Baghdad Battery presents a particularly thorny problem. The initial dating by Wilhelm König placed its creation squarely within the Parthian period, which spanned from around 250 B.C. to 224 A.D. This was a reasonable assessment, as the excavation site at Qujat Rabu contained material from that era, and the simple, unglazed terracotta style of the jar was consistent with other Parthian finds. A Parthian origin sets the artifact firmly in a time of great cultural exchange, when the Silk Road connected Rome to Han China, and Mesopotamian centers like Ctesiphon were bustling hubs of commerce and ideas. If the jar was a battery from this period, it would mean its invention predated Alessandro Volta by an astonishing 2,000 years, a truly mind-boggling gap that would demand a radical rethinking of ancient technological capabilities. However, the plot thickens considerably with later re-examinations of the artifact's provenance. After Koenig's initial work, other scholars took a closer look at the stylistic details of the jar and the construction methods, and some began to propose a different later date. They suggested that the battery might actually belong to the subsequent Sassanian Empire, which ruled the region from 224 A.D. until the Arab-Muslim conquests in the mid-7th century. This shift, while seemingly a matter of just a few hundred years, carries profound implications. The Sassanian period was a renaissance of Persian culture, art, and science, a powerful empire that was a direct rival to Rome and then Byzantium. It was an era of advanced metalworking, intricate court culture, and significant scholarly activity. Placing the battery in this context makes the idea of a sophisticated, if isolated, technological discovery feel slightly less anachronistic. It brings the artifact centuries closer to the dawn of the Islamic Golden Age, a period that would see an explosion of scientific innovation, and it invites us to consider the possibility of a continuous, if hidden, thread of experimentation stretching from the late antique world into the medieval era. The primary challenge in settling this dating debate is the artifact's own history. The precise circumstances of its excavation in the 1930s were not documented with the meticulousness expected of modern archaeology. The exact stratigraphic layer it was found in, the specific level of soil that acts as a time capsule, was not clearly recorded. This lack of definitive contextual evidence leaves the door open for interpretation based almost entirely on the style of the pottery and the materials used. While some archaeologists are confident in a Sassanian attribution, the evidence is circumstantial rather than conclusive. This uncertainty is more than just an academic quibble. It fundamentally shapes the narrative around the battery. A Parthian battery is a far more isolated and mysterious anomaly, a spark of genius that appears to flicker out without any clear influence. A Sassanian battery, however, sits at a historical crossroads. It exists in a world that was on the cusp of major scientific revolutions, making it slightly easier to imagine how such knowledge, if it existed, could have been passed along or independently rediscovered. The true age of the Baghdad Battery remains one of its most guarded secrets, a missing piece of the puzzle that prevents us from fully understanding the world that created it and the purpose for which it was truly intended. If these artifacts were indeed a known and utilized technology, perhaps even a trade secret among a specialized guild of metalworkers or priests, the most puzzling aspect of their story becomes their profound scarcity. To date, only about a dozen objects identified as potential Baghdad batteries have ever been brought to light. For skeptics, this is arguably the most powerful evidence against the electrical theory. When we consider other ancient technologies, even complex ones, we typically find them in abundance. The Romans left behind countless examples of their glassware, their intricate water systems, and their coinage. If the generation of electricity was an understood principle, wouldn't we expect to find more than just a handful of these devices scattered across the archaeological landscape? The argument is compelling. A truly significant invention, one that offered a tangible advantage, would have been reproduced, improved upon, and its use would have left a much broader footprint. The fact that we see no evolution in the design, no larger-scale versions, and no workshops dedicated to their production strongly suggests that these jars were not part of a widespread technological tradition. They appear as anomalies, which in archaeology often points to a unique, one-off function rather than a mainstream practice. This scarcity forces us to confront a critical possibility: that our entire perspective is skewed by a classic case of survivorship bias. What if the reason we've only found a dozen is because we've only correctly identified a dozen? Think about the object's components. To an untrained eye, or even to a rushed archaeologist working on a large dig site a century ago, what does a Baghdad battery look like? It looks like a clay pot with a corroded lump of metal inside. Without the specific hypothesis of König to guide us, there would be no reason to look twice at such a find. It would be catalogued as a simple storage jar, perhaps with its contents a scroll having long since decomposed. It is entirely plausible that hundreds or even thousands of similar jars have been unearthed over the years, only to be dismissed as unremarkable and stored away in the basements of museums worldwide, forever mislabeled as ordinary domestic containers. The very act of identifying a potential battery requires a pre-existing suspicion, a willingness to see the asphalt not as a simple sealant but as a deliberate insulator. Without that modern lens, the evidence is effectively invisible. Yet, this counter-argument, while intriguing, bumps against a major hurdle. If these were common enough to be misclassified in large numbers, we would still expect to find some form of corroborating evidence beyond the jars themselves. Technologies, especially those involving specialized knowledge, leave behind a supporting cast of artifacts. Where are the tools for manufacturing the precise copper cylinders? Where are the crucibles for melting the asphalt plugs? Most importantly, where is the evidence of their use? If they were employed for electroplating, we should find workshops with chemical residues or the aforementioned wires and connectors. If they were used for medical or religious purposes, we might expect to find specialized applicators or depictions in art. The complete absence of this peripheral evidence is deafening. It's the difference between finding a single, strange-looking key and finding a whole locksmith's workshop. The key alone is a mystery. The workshop confirms its purpose. For the Baghdad Battery, we have the potential key, but no workshop, no keyring, and no locked door that it obviously fits. This silence in the archaeological record is what makes the battery theory so difficult for mainstream scholarship to accept. It posits a sophisticated technology that somehow managed to exist without leaving any of the typical traces that such technologies inevitably produce, making it an incredibly neat and tidy anomaly in a field usually defined by messy, abundant evidence. To truly appreciate the enigma of the Baghdad Battery, we must step into the vibrant, sophisticated world that might have created it. Whether it belongs to the Parthian or Sassanian period, we are not talking about a primitive or isolated culture. These were sprawling, powerful empires that stood as equals to Rome and Byzantium, hubs of international trade and intellectual exchange along the Silk Road. The Parthians, who ruled from the 3rd century B.C. to the 3rd century A.D., were renowned for their eclectic culture, absorbing and refining ideas from the Greeks they had conquered, the Persians who were their ancestors, and the diverse peoples across their domain. Their capital, Ctesiphon, was a metropolis of immense wealth and learning. Following them, the Sassanian Empire ushered in a true Persian Renaissance, a golden age of art, science, and statecraft that would directly influence the later Islamic Golden Age. These were not societies stumbling in the dark. They were centers of innovation with a documented thirst for knowledge. Their achievements in fields adjacent to electrochemistry are particularly striking. Sassanian metalworkers, for instance, were masters of their craft, producing steel and intricate alloys of exceptional quality. They practiced advanced chemical processes like distillation and the production of acids, which were essential for dyeing, perfume making, and medicine. The very components of the battery, copper, iron, and asphalt, were materials they knew intimately and used with precision. The creation of a sealed vessel with an insulating plug would have been a straightforward task for their artisans. In the realm of medicine, physicians of the time compiled extensive texts detailing complex surgical procedures and pharmacological remedies, demonstrating a systematic, experimental approach to understanding the natural world. This culture of practical experimentation and sophisticated craftsmanship makes the idea of someone accidentally discovering a galvanic reaction, perhaps by storing an acidic liquid in a metal-lined jar, feel less like a fantasy and more like a plausible incident in a society comfortable with manipulating materials. Yet, this is where the contradiction becomes so fascinating. For all their documented ingenuity, the historical record from these empires is completely silent on the subject of electricity. We have surviving texts on astronomy that accurately chart the stars, medical scrolls that describe intricate surgeries, and administrative records detailing every aspect of life. But there is not a single line of text, not a single diagram or vague allusion that describes a tingling sensation from a jar, a spark between metals, or any device resembling an electrical apparatus. This silence is profound. If this knowledge existed, even as a guarded secret among a small group of priests or alchemists, one would expect some whisper, some coded reference to have survived. The fact that nothing has suggests that if the Baghdad Battery was indeed an electrochemical cell, IT's Chinese letter yuanli, meaning principle or theory, may have been a fleeting, unexplained phenomenon, a curious effect without an understood cause, a tool whose mechanism remained a mystery even to its users. It stands as a haunting reminder that a civilization can be technologically advanced in many documented ways while simultaneously possessing a single, isolated secret that vanishes without a trace, leaving behind only a physical object to baffle future generations. Amidst all the debate surrounding the copper and iron, one of the most crucial and telling components of the entire assembly is the substance that holds it all together, the asphalt plug. This dark, bituminous material, carefully fitted to seal the mouth of the jar and isolate the iron rod from the copper cylinder, is the linchpin of the entire battery theory. Modern engineers looking at the design immediately recognize its primary function. It's a near-perfect insulator. For an electrochemical cell to work, the two dissimilar metals must be prevented from touching. Direct contact would create a short circuit, rendering the whole setup useless. The asphalt plug does exactly that, creating a physical and electrical barrier that forces any potential current to flow through the intended external path, the electrolyte solution. From this perspective, the plug isn't just a cap, it's a deliberately engineered component, a clever solution to a specific technical problem. Its presence suggests a level of understanding about the need to control the flow of energy, making the case for an intentional battery significantly stronger. It's difficult to imagine a more suitable material being readily available to an ancient artisan. Asphalt is durable, waterproof, and an excellent electrical insulator, properties that seem almost tailor-made for this exact application. However, to see the asphalt plug only through this modern, technological lens is to ignore the vast archaeological context in which it was found. Bitumen, the natural form of asphalt, was an incredibly common and versatile material throughout the ancient Middle East, with large natural deposits readily available in Mesopotamia. It was the duct tape and super glue of its time, used for a breathtaking array of everyday purposes. Archaeologists have found it employed as a waterproof sealant for grain storage jars and water cisterns, as a powerful adhesive for inlaying mosaics and repairing pottery, and even as a mortar for setting bricks in major construction projects. It was used to caulk the hulls of boats and to waterproof the baskets used for transporting goods. In essence, finding asphalt in an ancient container is about as surprising as finding a plastic lid on a modern Tupperware bowl. It's the default, expected sealant for the time and place. From this standpoint, the plug's function was likely entirely mundane: to create an airtight and watertight seal, preserving whatever was inside the jar from moisture, insects, and decay. If the jar held a scroll, the asphalt would have been ideal for keeping the papyrus or parchment dry. If it held a precious oil or perfume, it would prevent evaporation. Its insulating property, so crucial to the battery theory, could have been a complete and accidental byproduct of its primary role as a simple, effective stopper. This duality is perfectly illustrated by other archaeological discoveries from the region. Excavations have uncovered countless sealed containers where asphalt was used in a purely practical capacity, with no possible electrical interpretation. There are jars where asphalt was used to fix a handle or to seal a crack, or simply to close a vessel containing organic remains that have long since decomposed. In none of these cases do we suspect a hidden technological purpose. We understand the material was being used for its well-documented adhesive and preservative qualities. This creates a challenging paradox for the Baghdad Battery, the very feature that makes it look so much like a purposeful electrical device. The insulating plug is also a feature that is perfectly consistent with ordinary, non-technological storage. We are left to weigh the probabilities. Is it more likely that an ancient inventor recognized the need for an insulator and selected the most appropriate material available? Or is it more likely that a standard sealing practice, when applied to a unique combination of internal metals, accidentally created an object that perfectly mimics a battery? The asphalt plug doesn't provide a definitive answer. Instead, it brilliantly encapsulates the entire mystery, being both the strongest evidence for intentional design and a perfectly reasonable example of routine ancient craftsmanship. Just as the debate over the Baghdad Battery's purpose reaches its most intriguing peak, the physical object at the center of the controversy adds one final, deeply frustrating layer to the mystery. It has virtually vanished. For decades, the original artifacts were believed to be safely housed within the vaults and display cases of the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad, the very institution where Wilhelm König first pieced together his revolutionary hypothesis. They were tangible links to the puzzle, available for scholars to examine, test, and debate, but the chaos of war would sever that link in a devastating way. In the tumultuous aftermath of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the National Museum fell victim to widespread looting and destruction. While the world watched in horror, thieves and vandals ransacked the building, making off with or destroying an estimated 15,000 items in a matter of days. It was a catastrophic loss for human history, a calculated assault on a nation's cultural memory, and the Baghdad batteries were among the countless priceless artifacts caught in the storm. The exact fate of these specific jars remains heartbreakingly uncertain. Some reports suggest they were simply stolen, likely ending up on the lucrative and shadowy international black market for antiquities. Others fear they may have been carelessly broken or discarded by looters who saw only an old pot with some useless corroded metal inside, unaware of the profound historical debate they held in their hands. The irony is staggering. An object that has sparked decades of scientific inquiry and forced us to rethink the limits of ancient technology has itself been lost to the very modern forces of conflict and neglect. We are now in the peculiar position of arguing over the function of an artifact that we can no longer directly study. Our entire understanding rests on photographs, the notes and drawings from König and other early researchers, and the findings from those who built replicas. The originals, the primary evidence, are ghosts. This disappearance makes the mystery permanent in a way that is rare in archaeology. Normally, as new technologies like advanced imaging and material analysis emerge, we can re-examine old finds with fresh eyes. An artifact sitting in a museum can be scanned, its residues tested, its secrets slowly teased out over time. The Baghdad Battery has been denied that future. Any hope of subjecting it to 21st century scientific techniques, perhaps analyzing microscopic residues inside the jar to definitively identify the electrolyte, or studying the corrosion patterns on the metals with electron microscopes to understand the electrochemical reactions that took place, has been tragically extinguished. The debate is now frozen, relying on data that is decades old. The physical loss of the batteries means we may never get a more conclusive answer. The mystery of their purpose is now inextricably tied to the mystery of their whereabouts, a double enigma that ensures the Baghdad Battery will continue to captivate and frustrate in equal measure, a tantalizing question mark from the past that we are no longer allowed to fully interrogate. While the academic debate over the Baghdad Battery simmers in scholarly journals, the artifact has exploded into a life of its own within popular culture, transforming from an archaeological curiosity into a definitive icon for theories of lost ancient knowledge. This journey from museum storage to mainstream fascination truly ignited with television shows that specialized in the mysterious and unexplained. A prime example is its prominent feature in an episode of the 1990s hit series The X-Files, a show built on the premise that the truth is out there. In that context, the battery wasn't presented as a controversial hypothesis. It was showcased as a concrete piece of evidence, an undeniable relic that proved ancient civilizations possessed technologies we thought were modern inventions. This kind of presentation is incredibly powerful. For millions of viewers, seeing a tangible object presented on a major network show as proof of advanced ancient science carries a weight that dry academic papers simply cannot match. It cemented the battery's status not as a question mark, but as an exclamation point in the narrative of forgotten human history. This pop culture adoption was further fueled by a specific genre of documentary programming, particularly those exploring alternative history and the so-called ancient astronaut theory. In these shows, the Baghdad Battery is frequently presented as a cornerstone of the argument. The narrative goes like this: mainstream archaeologists are either too closed-minded or are actively suppressing the truth because the existence of such an object dismantles the conventional timeline of human progress. The battery is portrayed as just one piece of a larger puzzle that includes structures like the pyramids of Giza or the Nazca lines, all supposedly pointing to a common conclusion: that an advanced prehistoric civilization existed, or that extraterrestrial visitors provided early humans with technological knowledge. Within this framework, the battery is no longer a solitary anomaly. It becomes a key exhibit in a grander trial against traditional history. Its simplicity is its strength. It's an easy-to-understand concept that viewers can grasp immediately, making it the perfect smoking gun to support more complex and speculative claims. This divergence has created a significant chasm between public perception and the academic consensus. For a vast audience captivated by these television shows and books, the Baghdad Battery is settled science. The question isn't if it was a battery, but why it was used. For these enthusiasts, the mystery is solved, and the artifact is clear proof that our history books are wrong. Meanwhile, within the halls of academia, the battery remains a fascinating but unproven hypothesis, an outlier that lacks the corroborating evidence required to rewrite history. Mainstream archaeologists don't dismiss it out of hand, but they demand a higher standard of proof, physical evidence of its use, like wires or electroplated objects, or its mention in contemporary text. The pop culture portrayal often simplifies this cautious, evidence-based approach as stubborn resistance, creating a narrative of us versus them that is inherently more dramatic and engaging for a television audience. The consequence of this pop culture embrace is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it has generated tremendous public interest in archaeology and ancient history, inspiring countless people to look at the past with a more curious and questioning eye. It has made the Baghdad Battery a household name among fans of mystery, ensuring its story continues to be told. On the other hand, it has often polarized the conversation, creating a scenario where nuanced scientific debate is overshadowed by sensationalist claims. The average person might now be firmly convinced the battery is real, but their understanding is based on entertainment media that has a vested interest in mystery over resolution. The true enigma of the Baghdad Battery, then, is not just about its function, but about how we, as a modern society, choose to interpret the uncertainties of the past. It serves as a powerful case study in how an object can escape the confines of academia to become a canvas onto which we project our deepest fascination with the idea of lost worlds and hidden truths, a symbol whose cultural power now far exceeds its physical size. To fully grasp the dilemma posed by the Baghdad Battery, it's incredibly instructive to look at another ancient discovery that once seemed just as impossibly out of place, the Antikythera mechanism. Recovered from a Roman-era shipwreck off the coast of Greece more than a century ago, this lump of corroded bronze gears was initially seen as a curiosity, an anomaly that didn't fit the established narrative of Greek technology. For decades, it languished in relative obscurity, its true complexity hidden beneath layers of calcite and corrosion. To many scholars, it was easier to dismiss it as a medieval astrolabe that had somehow fallen into an ancient wreck than to accept that such a sophisticated geared device could have existed in the 1st century B.C. The parallel to the Baghdad Battery is striking. Both were unique finds that challenged the linear progression of technological history, and both were initially met with a degree of skepticism born from the sheer unexpectedness of their existence. The turning point for the Antikythera mechanism came with the advent of new investigative technologies, when researchers began to use high-resolution X-ray tomography and 3D surface imaging to peer inside the calcified mass. They revealed an intricate clockwork of interlocking gears of breathtaking precision. It was no mere navigational tool. It was a complex analog computer capable of predicting the motions of the sun and moon, tracking the cycles of the Olympic Games, and even accounting for astronomical irregularities like the elliptical orbit of the moon. This was a device that demonstrated a level of mechanical engineering and astronomical understanding that historians believed had been lost to the world until the rise of European cathedral clocks in the 14th century. Its discovery forced a dramatic reassessment of ancient Greek science, proving that the seeds of mechanical complexity were planted far earlier and flowered more brilliantly than anyone had dared to suspect. The lesson here is profound. The Antikythera mechanism was not understood until we developed the tools to see it properly. For the Baghdad Battery, this analogy offers a powerful argument for keeping an open mind. Just because we lack the contextual evidence, the wires, the manuals, the other examples does not mean such evidence never existed. It might simply mean we are looking at the artifact with the wrong tools or through an incomplete historical lens. The absence of proof, as the saying goes, is not proof of absence. However, this is where the analogy also presents a crucial and sobering distinction. While the Antikythera mechanism was a solitary find for a long time, its purpose has been largely decoded. We can now look at its gears and inscriptions and understand, with a great degree of certainty, what it was built to do. It has been reintegrated into history. We can point to references in Cicero's writings about similar devices, and we can see its intellectual lineage in the works of ancient astronomers. The mechanism is no longer an isolated mystery. It is a confirmed data point that has enriched our understanding of the ancient world. The Baghdad Battery, by contrast, remains stubbornly opaque. Despite successful modern recreations, we have no such Rosetta Stone to decipher its intended use. There are no textual references to jars that tingle or vessels that plate metal with invisible force. The Antikythera mechanism found its context. The battery remains a question mark without one. This difference highlights the fundamental challenge. The Antikythera mechanism, for all its initial obscurity, was part of a documented tradition of Greek mathematical and astronomical inquiry. The battery, if it is a battery, appears as a technological island with no visible bridges to the mainland of known Parthian or Sassanian science. The analogy thus serves a dual purpose. It cautions us against dismissing singular artifacts too quickly, reminding us that history is full of surprises, but it also underscores that true understanding requires more than just the artifact itself. It demands a web of corroborating evidence that can place it within the intellectual and practical world of its creators. The Antikythera mechanism, once studied with modern technology, found its web. The Baghdad Battery still waits for its threads to be discovered, leaving it suspended between tantalizing possibility and historical silence, a testament to the fact that some ancient whispers are fainter and more difficult to hear than others. Experimental archaeology offers a powerful lens through which to examine the Baghdad Battery, moving beyond theoretical debate and into the tangible world of physical reconstruction. This approach doesn't just ask, could it have worked, but rather, how would an ancient artisan have actually built and used it? To answer this, modern researchers have stepped into the shoes of Parthian or Sassanian craftspeople, deliberately limiting themselves to the tools, materials, and knowledge that would have been available 2,000 years ago. The process begins not with a pre-rolled copper sheet from a modern supplier, but with raw copper ore smelted in a clay furnace using techniques documented from the period. The act of carefully hammering and shaping the copper into a perfect cylinder, and then fashioning a snug-fitting cap, becomes a test of skill in itself, revealing that the task was well within the capabilities of a skilled metalworker of the era. Crafting the iron rod presents a different set of challenges. Ancient iron, often produced in bloomery furnaces, was not the uniform, pure metal we know today. It could be brittle, filled with slag inclusions, and difficult to shape into a straight, consistent rod. Yet, experiments show that with patience and the right hammering techniques, a serviceable rod could be produced. The most telling step, however, is the creation of the asphalt plug. Here, the experimental archaeologist must source natural bitumen, heat it to a workable consistency, and carefully pour or press it into the mouth of the terracotta jar, embedding the iron rod while ensuring a perfect seal against the copper cylinder. This hands-on process highlights the intentionality of the design. It would have been far simpler to just seal the jar with a flat piece of asphalt or a clay stopper. The deliberate act of molding the plug around the rod to isolate it is a physical argument for a specific, non-random purpose. The moment of truth in these experiments arrives when the replica is filled with an electrolyte. Using substances like vinegar or freshly squeezed grape juice, researchers have consistently confirmed Wilhelm König's basic hypothesis: the assembly does produce a voltage. But these practical tests reveal nuances that pure theory misses. For instance, the current output is not constant. It starts strong but gradually diminishes as the electrolyte depletes and the metals corrode. An ancient user would have needed to understand that the solution needed periodic replacement, adding a layer of maintenance to the process. Furthermore, the experiments demonstrate the critical importance of the asphalt insulator. If the iron rod accidentally touches the copper cylinder, the current stops instantly. This reinforces the idea that the plug's insulating property was essential, not incidental to the device's function. Some of the most fascinating experiments involve attempting to use the generated current for a practical application, such as electroplating. Enthusiasts have successfully plated small objects like a silver ring or a copper coin with a thin layer of gold by connecting several replica batteries in series. However, this success comes with significant caveats. The process is incredibly slow, often taking many hours or even a full day to achieve a visible coating. It requires a steady hand to maintain the connections using hypothetical conductors like thin iron or copper wire, and the resulting gold layer, while authentic, is exceedingly thin. These real-world trials force us to ask whether such a slow, finicky process would have been preferable to the faster, though more dangerous, method of fire gilding. The experiments don't provide a definitive answer, but they ground the debate in practical reality, showing both the astonishing possibility and the considerable limitations of the technology. Beyond simply proving function, experimental archaeology can also explore the human experience of using such a device. What would it have felt like? Researchers describe a faint but distinct tingling sensation when touching the terminals with a moistened finger, a sensation that would have been mysterious and potentially profound to someone with no concept of electricity. This tangible sensory output opens up a different dimension to the medical or ritual theories. A healer applying the current to a patient's temple for a headache, or a priest allowing a worshipper to feel the spirit of a statue, becomes a more plausible scenario when we move from abstract theory to lived physical experience. The experiments transform the battery from a static museum piece into a dynamic tool with a unique and potentially powerful effect on the human senses. Ultimately, while experimental archaeology cannot peer into the minds of the ancient users to reveal their true intentions, it provides an invaluable bridge across the centuries. It confirms the artifact's potential while vividly illustrating the practical realities and challenges its users would have faced, adding a crucial layer of physical evidence to a mystery otherwise dominated by interpretation and speculation. Now consider a scene from the year 1800 in Italy. Alessandro Volta, a brilliant physicist, stacks alternating discs of zinc and copper, separating each pair with a piece of cardboard soaked in salt water. He demonstrates that this voltaic pile produces a continuous and reliable electric current, a discovery that would electrify the scientific world and mark the official birth of the battery. The design is elegant in its simplicity, a testament to the systematic approach of the Enlightenment. But if we look back at the Baghdad artifact, the similarities are nothing short of astonishing. Both devices rely on the same fundamental principle: two different metals, an electrolyte, and a physical separator to prevent a short circuit. Volta used a stack of discs for greater power. The Mesopotamian version used a single cell in a jar. Yet the core concept is virtually identical. This parallel forces us to confront a staggering possibility: that the foundational principle of the electrochemical cell was not a novel invention of the 19th century, but a reinvention of a technology that had been discovered, used, and then completely lost for over a millennium and a half. The implications of this are profound. If the Baghdad jar was indeed a battery, it means that the spark of this particular genius flickered into life not in the well-lit laboratories of Europe, but in the workshops of the ancient Near East, only to be extinguished by the sands of time. This challenges the very way we view scientific progress. We often imagine it as a linear, cumulative staircase, where each generation builds directly upon the knowledge of the last. But the history of technology is filled with examples that break this mold, showcasing what is known as parallel or independent invention. The most famous example is calculus, developed simultaneously by Isaac Newton and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in the 17th century. Across the globe, cultures independently invented writing, agriculture, and pyrotechnics. The principle of the battery could be another such case, a powerful idea whose time had come, not once but twice, separated by a vast gulf of forgotten history. This concept of parallel invention offers a compelling framework for understanding the battery. It allows for the possibility that the Parthian or Sassanian creators were not beneficiaries of some lost advanced civilization or outside influence, but were simply brilliant, observant experimenters in their own right. Perhaps an artisan, while working with metals and acidic solutions, noticed a peculiar tingling sensation or observed the corrosion of one metal faster than another. Through trial and error, they could have refined this observation into a functional, if limited, device. Their achievement would stand as a testament to the universal nature of scientific inquiry, a flash of insight that emerged from the practical needs and curious minds of their specific culture, completely isolated from the intellectual currents that would later lead Volta to the same conclusion. Yet the comparison with Volta's pile also highlights a crucial and telling difference: context. Volta's invention did not appear in a vacuum. It was the culmination of decades of prior research into electricity by figures like Luigi Galvani, and it was immediately recognized, tested, and improved upon by a vibrant international scientific community. Volta published his findings, communicated them to the Royal Society in London, and saw his design rapidly refined and applied to new problems, such as Humphrey Davy's use of a powerful voltaic pile to isolate new chemical elements. The voltaic pile ignited a technological revolution because it was born into an ecosystem that could nurture, understand, and propagate it. The Baghdad Battery, by stark contrast, appears to have no such context. There is no evidence of a preceding tradition of electrical experimentation in Mesopotamia, no contemporary texts discussing ITS Chinese letter Yuanli principle, and no trail of improved subsequent models. It stands alone. This isolation is the strongest argument against it being a recognized technology. For a parallel invention to truly take root, it needs fertile ground. Volta's discovery fell on prepared soil. The Baghdad Battery, if it was a battery, seems to have fallen on stone, its potential dying with its creator or the small guild that may have understood it. This difference doesn't disprove its function, but it does explain why one discovery changed the world while the other became a museum curiosity. It underscores that a great idea is only half the battle. Its impact depends entirely on the world it is born into, and whether that world is ready to listen to its spark. This concept of the battery as a tool for ritual and wonder leads us into one of the most captivating interpretations of all, that its true purpose was not to plate metal or heal bodies, but to touch the human soul. If we set aside our modern, utilitarian perspective and instead view the artifact through the eyes of someone for whom the world was filled with unseen spirits and divine forces, its potential transforms entirely. Imagine the hushed atmosphere of a subterranean temple, dedicated perhaps to a deity of fire or the forge. In a niche stands a statue of the god, its eyes crafted from two polished gems. A priest, knowing the secret, carefully connects wires from a series of these clay jars to small, carefully hidden lamps behind the statue's head. As the circuit is completed, a faint, eerie glow emanates from the gems, making the idol appear to be alive with a celestial inner light. In that moment, for the worshipper, the divine is no longer an abstract concept. It is a tangible, visible presence. This would not have been a crude trick, but a profound piece of sacred theater, a technological marvel employed to bridge the gap between the human and the divine, inspiring genuine awe and reinforcing the power of the priesthood. The experience could have been even more direct and personal. Consider a rite of passage or a healing ceremony where a supplicant is instructed to grasp the handles of a metal object, perhaps shaped like a serpent or an ancient symbol. Unbeknownst to them, it is connected to the jar. As they hold it, a hidden assistant completes the circuit, and the individual feels a distinct, unexplained vibration or a sharp, tingling sensation coursing through their hands. In a world without any concept of electricity, how would this be interpreted? It would not be seen as a scientific phenomenon, but as a visceral, personal encounter with a supernatural force. This could be framed as the god's acceptance, a cleansing fire purging illness, or a divine warning. The psychological impact would have been immense, far outweighing the minute physical effect. The battery, in this context, becomes a key to unlocking powerful emotional and spiritual states, a catalyst for faith rather than a tool for craftsmanship. This interpretation is deeply grounded in what we know about how ancient cultures interacted with the natural world. Phenomena that were mysterious and powerful were consistently attributed to the gods. The rumble of thunder was the voice of a sky deity. The eruption of a volcano was the anger of the earth. A sudden, unpredictable spark from a piece of amber rubbed with fur, or the numbing shock from an electric fish, were not seen as physics, but as manifestations of magic or divine power. The Greek historian Plutarch wrote of priests using naturally magnetic lodestones to create the illusion that a statue was suspended in mid-air, a miracle designed to inspire devotion. In this light, the controlled production of a mild electric current would have been the ultimate tool for a priestly class. It was a repeatable, controllable miracle. Unlike a lightning bolt, which was terrifying and random, the current from the battery was safe, manageable, and could be deployed precisely when needed to maximize its dramatic and spiritual impact. It represented a mastery over a fundamental force of nature, a secret knowledge that granted its keeper immense authority. The beauty of this theory is that it elegantly sidesteps many of the practical objections raised against the electroplating hypothesis. The need for wires, while still present, becomes less of an issue. A single, short connection hidden behind an altar or within a handheld ceremonial object is far more plausible than the complex setup required for a production workshop. The low voltage and current, which make the battery seem impractical for industrial use, are perfectly suited for creating a startling sensory experience rather than performing physical work. A faint glow or a subtle tingling is exactly the kind of effect that would be most effective in a dimly lit, incense-filled temple where suggestion and atmosphere are everything. Furthermore, the scarcity of the artifacts aligns with this idea. If these were sacred objects, their construction and use might have been a closely guarded secret of a specific temple or a small, elite group of priests. They would not have been mass-produced or widely available, but rather treated as powerful and rare ritual implements, explaining why so few have survived or been correctly identified. This spiritual lens doesn't just offer an alternative function for the Baghdad Battery. It provides a coherent narrative that explains its peculiar design, its limitations, and its isolation in the archaeological record, framing it not as a failed piece of technology, but as a brilliantly successful instrument of faith. While the electrical theories capture our imagination with visions of ancient technology, we must give equal weight to the most widely accepted and sober explanation put forth by mainstream archaeology. This interpretation asks us to see the Baghdad Battery not as a power source, but as a highly specialized and sophisticated library for a single precious document. In this scenario, the object's components served a purely protective function. The iron rod acted as a sturdy central spindle, around which a sacred scroll made of papyrus or parchment was carefully wound. The delicate scroll would have been protected from crushing and physical damage by the surrounding copper cylinder, which served as a rigid, durable sheath. Finally, the asphalt plug was not an electrical insulator but a remarkably effective hermetic seal, creating an airtight and waterproof barrier to shield the organic scroll inside from the two great enemies of parchment, moisture and insects. When viewed through this lens, the jar transforms from a mysterious scientific device into an exceptionally well-designed time capsule, built to preserve knowledge, not generate energy. This explanation aligns perfectly with known practices. The preservation of important texts was a paramount concern, and we have numerous examples of scrolls being stored in cylindrical containers, though usually made of simpler materials like wood or clay. However, this seemingly straightforward interpretation immediately encounters a significant hurdle: the sheer over-engineering of the object. If the goal was simply to protect a scroll, why go to the extraordinary expense and effort of using high-quality copper and precisely fashioning it into a cylinder? Throughout the ancient world, from Egypt to Rome, valuable scrolls were routinely stored in far less elaborate containers. A simple tubular case made of wood, leather, or even a common clay jar with a wax seal would have sufficed and been vastly more common and cheaper to produce. The use of copper, a valuable metal that had to be mined, smelted, and worked by a skilled metalsmith, suggests that the contents were considered so immensely valuable that no ordinary container would do. This line of thinking leads to a compelling question. What kind of document would warrant such a royal treatment? Perhaps it held a uniquely sacred text, the foundational scripture of a mystery cult, a king's edict of immense importance, or a map to a hidden treasure. The elaborate construction itself becomes a testament to the scroll's perceived value, implying that its loss was considered an unacceptable catastrophe. Yet, even this defense of the scroll theory has its own weaknesses. If these jars were designed for such critical documents, where are the other examples? We have found countless scroll repositories from antiquity, but none share this specific and intricate copper and iron design. This particular method of preservation appears to be an anomaly, not a standard practice. Furthermore, the presence of the iron rod itself is problematic. Iron is highly susceptible to rust, especially in a sealed environment that might trap humidity. Over centuries, that rusting iron rod would have expanded, potentially cracking the clay jar from the inside, and its corrosive byproducts would have actively damaged the very scroll it was meant to protect. A spindle made of bronze, a more stable and commonly used metal, would have been a far wiser choice for long-term preservation, raising doubts about the iron rod's intended role as a simple core. The scroll jar theory provides a perfectly logical, non-technological explanation that fits within the known boundaries of ancient behavior. But its inconsistencies, the unusual materials, the potential for self-destruction, and its isolated occurrence leave just enough room for doubt to ensure that the mystery of the Baghdad Battery remains tantalizingly unresolved, a puzzle where the most conventional answer still doesn't quite fit all the pieces perfectly. Considering the path not taken by this ancient technology forces us to confront the fragile nature of progress itself. What if the secret of the Baghdad Battery hadn't been lost? What if that spark of electrochemical knowledge had been fanned into a flame, passed down through generations of scholars and artisans in the great libraries and workshops of the Islamic Golden Age or the burgeoning universities of medieval Europe? It's a tantalizing thought experiment that highlights just how contingent our modern world really is. A continuous thread of electrical experimentation, starting in antiquity, could have dramatically accelerated the pace of discovery. The foundational work of figures like William Gilbert on magnetism in the 16th century, or the experiments of Stephen Gray with electrical conduction in the 18th century, might have occurred centuries earlier. Instead of Volta's pile being a revolutionary breakthrough in 1800, it could have been a logical refinement of a long-established principle. This alternate timeline invites us to imagine a world where the electric telegraph, or even simple electric lighting, might have illuminated the halls of Renaissance palaces, fundamentally altering the rhythm of daily life and the pace of global communication long before the Industrial Revolution as we know it even began. Yet, this speculative journey also reveals the immense challenges such an early revolution would have faced. The most significant barrier wouldn't necessarily have been the scientific principle itself, but the supporting infrastructure required to turn a curiosity into a transformative technology. Even if the knowledge had been preserved, practical application on a meaningful scale would have been severely limited. Producing the consistent, high-quality copper and iron needed for reliable batteries would have been a monumental task with pre-industrial metallurgy. Creating effective wires for transmitting power over any distance was an insurmountable problem without the ability to draw thin, uniform metal strands or the understanding of conductivity. The very concept of a circuit was millennia away from being formalized. A single battery producing less than 2 volts was a fascinating toy, but a useful electrical grid requires a deep understanding of series and parallel connections, voltage, and current concepts that were completely beyond the scientific framework of the ancient or medieval world. The battery might have remained just that, a battery, a self-contained wonder with no obvious path to the network of technologies needed to make it truly world-changing. Its potential may have been inherent, but the ecosystem to nurture it was utterly absent. This leads us to the core reason the Baghdad Battery appears as such a stark technological dead end: the catastrophic collapse and fragmentation of the empires that might have nurtured it. The knowledge of the ancient world was not lost in a single dramatic event, but through a long, slow process of cultural erosion and institutional disintegration. The Library of Alexandria is the most famous symbol of this loss, but it was just one node in a vast network of knowledge that frayed and snapped. The succession of conflicts, from the Roman-Persian wars that exhausted both empires to the seismic shift of the Islamic conquests and the later Mongol invasions, created centuries of instability. In such an environment, specialized, fragile knowledge is often the first casualty. The secret of a peculiar jar that produced a tingling sensation, likely held by a small guild of priests or metalworkers, would have been incredibly vulnerable. Without a robust, written tradition to preserve it, the death of a few key individuals or the destruction of a single temple workshop could extinguish that knowledge forever. This stands in stark contrast to other fields like mathematics or astronomy, which were often preserved because they were tied to practical necessities like taxation, calendar keeping, and navigation, skills essential to any functioning state. A seemingly esoteric electrical effect had no such bureaucratic anchor to keep it from drifting into oblivion. The journey of other inventions underscores this point beautifully. Take, for example, the intricate geared astrolabes used by medieval Islamic astronomers for navigation and timekeeping. This technology was meticulously documented in detailed manuals, translated across languages, and continuously refined because it served a critical and obvious purpose for trade, religious observance, and governance. Its utility ensured its survival and transmission. The Baghdad Battery, by comparison, lacked a clear, indispensable application that would have compelled its preservation and refinement across generations and cultures. Even if it was used for electroplating, the established, if dangerous, method of fire gilding was effective enough that there was no overwhelming pressure to switch to a novel, slower, and more technically demanding process. For a technology to survive a dark age, it must be not just clever but crucial. The battery, in all its mystery, seems to have fallen on the wrong side of that line, a brilliant solution in search of a problem pressing enough to make it unforgettable. Its story is a powerful reminder that history is shaped not only by the ideas that blossom, but perhaps even more so by the countless seeds that, for lack of the right conditions, simply wither away without a trace. At the very heart of the battery theory lies a ghost, a crucial component that has long since evaporated into the air of 2 millennia, the electrolyte. This mysterious liquid is the essential lifeblood of any electrochemical cell, the medium that allows ions to flow between the copper and iron, sparking the reaction that generates electricity. Without it, the Baghdad jar is just an intriguing assembly of metal and clay, but with the right solution inside, it transforms into something else entirely. The question of what that liquid might have been opens up a fascinating investigation into ancient chemistry and everyday life, forcing us to consider what substances were readily available, how effective they would have been, and whether their use points to an intentional design or a fortunate accident. This isn't just about identifying a liquid, it's about reconstructing the thought process of a potential ancient experimenter. The most commonly proposed candidates are all weak organic acids that were household staples in the ancient Near East. Vinegar, produced from the fermentation of wine or beer, was ubiquitous, used for preserving food, cleaning, and even in simple medical preparations. Grape juice or wine itself, which turns acidic over time, would have been equally accessible. Citrus fruits like lemons, while not native to Mesopotamia, were known through trade networks, and their potent citric acid would have made for a highly effective electrolyte. Each of these substances reacts with the two dissimilar metals in a predictable way. The acid begins to corrode the more reactive iron rod, causing it to lose electrons. These electrons then travel through the electrolyte to the less reactive copper cylinder, creating a potential difference or voltage between the two metals. In simple terms, the iron sacrificially dissolves to produce a flow of electrical energy. A modern replica using vinegar can generate a little over 1 volt, while lemon juice, being a stronger acid, can produce a slightly higher voltage, perhaps up to 1.5 volts. The chemical principle is straightforward, and the ingredients were all within reach. Yet, the practicalities of sourcing, storing, and maintaining this electrolyte reveal the challenges an ancient user would have faced. An acidic liquid left in a terracotta jar would slowly evaporate or become depleted as the chemical reaction proceeded. The user would need to understand that the jar required periodic refilling to maintain its effect, suggesting a sustained and deliberate use, not a one-time experiment. Furthermore, the corrosion process would have been visibly apparent. After a period of use, the iron rod would have shown significant rusting and pitting, while the copper cylinder might develop a patina. This raises a curious point. If these were valued devices, why haven't we found examples with heavily corroded or replaced internal components? The state of the metals inside the few jars we have might have provided a clue, but without meticulous modern residue analysis, which was never performed on the originals before their disappearance, we are left to speculate. The absence of any crusty, acidic residue inside the jars is often cited by skeptics, but given the immense passage of time and the likelihood of the jars being cleaned or reused, this absence is hardly conclusive proof against the theory. This leads us to the most profound and frustrating dead end in the entire investigation: the tragic loss of the primary evidence. Had the original Baghdad batteries remained securely housed in the National Museum of Iraq, 21st century science could have provided near-definitive answers. Techniques like gas chromatography, mass spectrometry are incredibly sensitive, capable of detecting the faintest molecular traces of organic compounds left behind after thousands of years. Scientists could have taken minute samples from the interior clay walls of the jar or from the corrosion products on the iron rod. Had the electrolyte been vinegar, they might have found traces of acetic acid. If it was wine, they could have identified tartaric acid. Even if the liquid had completely evaporated, its chemical fingerprint might have remained, a silent witness to what once filled the vessel. This analysis could have settled the debate, confirming the presence of an acidic electrolyte and perhaps even pinpointing its source. But that opportunity is almost certainly gone, lost in the looting of 2003. The original artifacts, the very subjects of this decades-long mystery, have vanished. Any residue that might have clung to their surfaces has either been contaminated, destroyed, or is now locked away in a private collection, inaccessible to rigorous scientific inquiry. This irrevocable loss transforms the question of the electrolyte from a solvable scientific problem into a permanent historical mystery. We can build replicas and demonstrate that the concept works with various liquids, but we can never know for certain what, if anything, the original creators poured into their peculiar jars. This void ensures that the Baghdad Battery will forever remain in the realm of compelling possibility rather than settled fact. A ghost powered by a ghost, its most vital secret having evaporated into the winds of history and conflict. Walking through the hushed halls of a museum, we place an immense trust in the labels placed beside ancient artifacts. These brief descriptions act as a lens, focusing our perception and telling us not just what an object is, but what it means. For decades, many institutions that displayed the Baghdad Battery presented it under a title that was as provocative as it was presumptive: the Parthian Battery. This simple choice of words is far from neutral. By branding it with that modern, technologically loaded term from the very start, the museum effectively short-circuited the visitor's own process of inquiry. Instead of encouraging a curious gaze that wonders, what could this be? The label instructs us to see a confirmed power source, priming our imagination with visions of ancient electricians long before we have a chance to consider the scroll jar theory or other possibilities. This framing turns a profound mystery into a seeming fact, satisfying our curiosity with a neat, exciting answer that may not be supported by the full weight of evidence. It's a classic example of how a catchy narrative can often overshadow a more complex and perhaps less sensational truth. This approach speaks to a deeper challenge within public archaeology: the tension between education and entertainment. Museums operate in a competitive landscape, vying for the attention of visitors who may only spend a few moments at each display. A label that reads "ancient storage jar" is unlikely to captivate as many people as one that promises a 2,000-year-old battery. The latter sparks wonder, ignites debate, and makes history feel dynamic and relevant. In this sense, the battery label is undeniably successful as a tool of engagement. However, this success comes at a potential cost. When an institution presents a highly speculative interpretation as the primary or sole explanation, it risks prioritizing a compelling story over educational integrity. The responsibility of a museum is not just to attract visitors, but to foster a genuine understanding of the past, which is often messy, incomplete, and resistant to simple labels. The Baghdad Battery becomes a case study in this delicate balancing act, forcing us to ask whether the goal is to inspire awe through certainty or to cultivate a more nuanced appreciation for the enduring puzzles of history. A more balanced and intellectually honest approach would be to reframe the presentation entirely. Imagine an exhibit titled not the Parthian Battery, but the Baghdad Jar: Mystery of an Ancient Artifact. The display could then be organized not as a statement but as an investigation. One panel would lay out Wilhelm König's battery hypothesis, complete with a working replica demonstrating the generation of a small voltage. Adjacent to it, another panel would present the scroll jar theory, explaining the common use of asphalt for sealing and displaying a reconstructed scroll on an iron spindle. A third could explore the electrotherapy or ritual possibilities. This method transforms the visitor from a passive recipient of information into an active participant in the historical debate. It openly acknowledges the limitations of archaeological evidence and showcases the scientific process of forming and testing hypotheses. This is not about dismissing the battery idea, but about contextualizing it as one compelling possibility among several, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. The way we handle the Baghdad Battery in our museums reflects a much broader issue in how we interpret the ancient world. Archaeology is a science of fragments, an attempt to reconstruct a full-color movie from a handful of scattered film clips. An artifact without context is like a single line of dialogue from a play. We can guess its meaning, but we can never be sure of the plot. The Baghdad Battery is the ultimate out-of-context object. We have the jar, but we lack the instruction manual, the inventor's notes, the workshop where it was used, and the contemporary accounts describing its function. In the face of such silence, there is a natural human tendency to fill the gaps with our own knowledge and assumptions. We see the components of a battery, so we assume it must be one. This phenomenon, known as the analogy of the familiar, is a constant trap for historians. It leads us to project our modern frameworks onto past societies, potentially obscuring their unique ways of thinking and creating. Ultimately, the greatest value of the Baghdad Battery may not lie in discovering its one true purpose, but in what it teaches us about the nature of history itself. It stands as a permanent monument to the gaps in our knowledge and the humility required to study the past. A museum that presents it as a solved puzzle does a disservice to its complexity. But an institution that embraces the ambiguity, that lays out the evidence for multiple theories and invites the public to weigh the evidence, performs a far more valuable service. It acknowledges that history is not a closed book of facts, but an ongoing conversation. The artifact challenges us to live with uncertainty, to appreciate the ingenuity of ancient cultures without needing to credit them with our own inventions, and to understand that some mysteries are valuable precisely because they remain unsolved, reminding us that the past will always hold secrets just beyond our grasp. And so we find ourselves returning to the central question: why, after all these decades of debate, does this humble clay jar continue to hold such a powerful grip on our imagination? The answer lies not in what we know about the Baghdad Battery, but in the perfect, tantalizing space of what we do not. It exists in a sweet spot of historical mystery, a puzzle that is neither easily solvable nor completely implausible. It's a ghost that whispers from the past, just loud enough to be heard but not clearly enough to be understood. This artifact doesn't scream of alien visitors or a lost super-civilization. Its components are mundane, its construction is humble. And that is precisely what makes it so compelling, because if this simple jar could be a battery, then it suggests that flashes of genius, of accidental discovery, were possible within the well-documented confines of our own history. It challenges our arrogance, our linear narrative of progress, without demanding we abandon logic entirely. It's a mystery that respects our intelligence, inviting us to become detectives rather than just spectators. This enduring appeal is a powerful catalyst for a very specific kind of curiosity. The battery doesn't just ask, "What was this used for?" It forces a much deeper question: how do we know what we think we know about the past? It turns every one of us into an armchair archaeologist, weighing the evidence for and against each theory. We find ourselves considering the practicality of electroplating, the psychological impact of a ritual shock, the simple logic of a scroll container. In doing so, we are participating in the very heart of the historical method, the interpretation of fragmentary evidence. The artifact becomes a lesson in humility, reminding us that our understanding of antiquity is built on a fragile foundation of surviving objects and texts, and that for every artifact we can explain, there might be a dozen more whose true purpose has been lost to time. It teaches us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but it also cautions us against filling those gaps with our own modern assumptions. Ultimately, the greatest legacy of the Baghdad Battery may be its role as a permanent reminder that history is not a closed book filled with settled facts. It is an ongoing, dynamic investigation. It is a conversation across centuries where a single new discovery, a faded scroll in a desert cave, a previously mislabeled jar in a museum basement, a new scientific technique for residue analysis could suddenly illuminate this 20-century-old mystery in an instant. The story of this object encourages a healthy skepticism toward definitive narratives and celebrates the idea that our past is still alive with unanswered questions. It tells us that the map of human achievement is still being drawn, and that there may be forgotten islands of innovation waiting to be rediscovered. The battery, in its silent, enigmatic way, ensures that we continue to look at the ancient world not as a static museum diorama, but as a living, breathing landscape of endless possibility, where the next great discovery might be hiding in plain sight, disguised as just an old pot. But to truly appreciate the significance of this enigmatic object, we need to zoom out from the jar itself and consider the much larger historical landscape it inhabits. The debate over its purpose, while fascinating, can sometimes obscure the more profound question it forces us to ask about the very nature of human innovation. For generations, the story of technology has been told as a linear, upward march, a grand staircase where each step, from the wheel to the steam engine to the microchip, is built firmly upon the one before it, predominantly in a westward-moving narrative that culminates in the European scientific revolution. This framework is comforting and orderly, but artifacts like the Baghdad Battery act as powerful disruptors, suggesting that the path of discovery is far more complex, fragmented, and globally distributed than this tidy timeline suggests. What if technological progress is less like a steady climb and more like a field of fireflies? Brief, brilliant flashes of insight illuminate different parts of the darkness at different times, only to fade away, their light forgotten until conditions are right for it to appear again elsewhere. The Baghdad Battery is a quintessential example of this phenomenon. If it was indeed a functional device, it represents a flash of understanding, a grasp of electrochemical principles that flickered into existence in the Middle East and then was extinguished for nearly 2 millennia before Volta's pile reignited the same idea in Italy. This isn't a story of failure. It's a story about the fragility of knowledge and the fact that an invention is only transformative if it emerges within a society that can recognize, sustain, and build upon it. The Parthian or Sassanian world may have possessed the spark, but it lacked the kind of interconnected, institutionally supported scientific community that would allow that spark to catch fire and spread. This challenges a deeply ingrained Eurocentric bias in our historical perspective. We often unconsciously assume that major scientific breakthroughs were inevitable discoveries waiting for European minds to formalize them. The Baghdad Battery reminds us that the seeds of these breakthroughs were scattered across the ancient world. Consider the sophisticated steel production in India, the advanced astronomical observatories of pre-Columbian America, or the staggering mathematical concepts developed in the Islamic Golden Age. These were not primitive precursors to real science, they were parallel streams of genius. The battery forces us to decenter the familiar narrative and acknowledge that the capacity for profound innovation was, and is, a universal human trait, not the exclusive property of any one culture or timeline. Its very existence is a testament to the ingenuity of a civilization that history has often relegated to a footnote in the story of Rome and Greece. Ultimately, the greatest lesson of the Baghdad Battery may have little to do with electricity at all. Instead, it serves as a powerful symbol for the vastness of our ignorance about the past. The archaeological record is not a complete library. It is a collection of scattered pages salvaged from a fire. For every grand monument that survives, like the pyramids, there are countless fragile technologies, intricate social practices, and nuanced understandings of the natural world that have vanished without a trace. This artifact stands as a permanent caution against the arrogance of assuming we have the full picture. It encourages a posture of humility and open-minded curiosity, reminding us that ancient peoples were not less intelligent than we are. They simply operated with a different set of priorities, materials, and knowledge. Whether it was a battery, a scroll jar, or something we haven't even considered, the Baghdad Battery's enduring mystery ensures that we continue to look at the ancient world not as a solved puzzle, but as a frontier still ripe with the potential for astonishing discovery. So where does this leave us after sifting through the theories, the experiments, and the historical context? Attempting to weigh the evidence for the Baghdad Battery is like holding a set of ancient scales where the weights on each side are made of entirely different materials. On one side, we have the compelling, tangible fact of physical replaceability. The single most powerful argument in favor of the electrical hypothesis is that it simply works. When you build a faithful replica using the specified materials and fill it with a common ancient electrolyte, it generates a measurable electric current. This is not a matter of speculation, it is a demonstrable, repeatable scientific fact. the design is not just accidentally functional, it is elegantly so. The asphalt plug serves the precise role of a modern insulator. The copper and iron form a classic electrochemical pair, and the jar itself is a perfect container for the reaction. The coincidence is staggering. It is incredibly difficult to look at this specific arrangement and conclude that its function as a battery is purely accidental. The probability that an ancient artisan would assemble these particular components in this exact configuration, for a purpose completely unrelated to the electrochemical reaction they produce, seems, on the face of it, remarkably low. This is the core of the pro-battery argument's strength. It provides a clean, logical, and scientifically valid explanation for why the object looks the way it does. Countering this is the overwhelming silence of the archaeological record, which forms the foundation of the skeptical position. The argument here is not about the object's capability, but about the complete absence of any evidence for its use. If this was a known technology, even a specialized one, we would expect to find some trace of its application. Where are the wires or other conductors needed to complete a circuit? Where are the workshops with multiple batteries linked together? Most damningly, where are the contemporary texts or illustrations that describe or even hint at such a device? For a civilization that meticulously recorded everything from star charts to medical recipes, the total lack of any reference to electrical phenomena is a silence that echoes through the centuries. Furthermore, the alternative explanation that it was an elaborate scroll jar fits seamlessly into known ancient practices. The use of asphalt for sealing, copper for protection, and an iron rod as a spindle, while perhaps over-engineered, is still a plausible function that requires no lost scientific principles. The skeptic's case is fundamentally one of parsimony. Why invoke a complex, otherwise unattested technology when a simpler, well-documented explanation is available? It is the application of Occam's razor to history, suggesting that the most straightforward interpretation is usually the correct one. Perhaps the most honest conclusion we can draw is that, with the evidence currently available, a definitive answer is genuinely impossible. The original artifacts are lost, and with them, any chance of performing the advanced residue analysis that might have settled the debate. We are left with a set of compelling but contradictory facts. The object can be a battery, but we have no proof that it was used as one. This impasse, however, is not a failure of investigation. It is the very essence of the artifact's enduring power. The value of the Baghdad Battery lies not in providing a simple answer, but in the profound questions it forces us to ask about the nature of history and evidence itself. It challenges the linear, progressive narrative of technological development, introducing the haunting possibility of parallel invention and forgotten genius. It reminds us that archaeology is not just about studying what survives, but also about grappling with the significance of what is missing. This humble jar teaches a crucial lesson in humility, showing that our understanding of the past is always a reconstruction, a best guess based on fragments that have survived the ravages of time, war, and decay. It stands as a permanent monument to the gaps in our knowledge, an enduring invitation to wonder, to question, and to remain open to the possibility that the past still holds secrets we have yet to fully comprehend. From the moment Wilhelm König first piked together the peculiar assembly of clay, copper, iron, and asphalt, the Baghdad Battery has ignited a debate that burns as brightly today as it did nearly a century ago. Our journey through this mystery has taken us from the dusty soil of Kujat Rabu to the cutting-edge labs of modern experimenters. We've explored the compelling elegance of the battery theory, a hypothesis so clean it seems to click into place with the satisfying logic of a completed circuit. The successful recreations prove beyond doubt that this ancient jar can generate a spark, a fact that forever elevates it from a simple pot to a potential window into a forgotten branch of science. Yet, for every flash of possibility, we've encountered the sobering weight of the skeptic's arguments. the deafening silence in the historical record, the complete absence of wires or other associated devices, and the perfectly logical alternative of the scroll jar. This is not a mystery with a simple solution. It is a profound tug of war between what the artifact could have been and what the broader evidence suggests it likely was. The true legacy of the Baghdad Battery, therefore, may have very little to do with electricity at all. Instead, its greatest power lies in its ability to challenge our assumptions and force a more nuanced, humble view of history. This unassuming object is a permanent reminder that the past is not a neatly organized museum exhibit but a vast, fragmented landscape where knowledge could be lost as easily as it was gained. It cautions us against the arrogance of a strictly linear timeline of progress, suggesting instead that innovation might flare up in isolated pockets of genius, only to be extinguished by time, conflict, or simple happenstance. The battery forces us to live with a beautiful, frustrating uncertainty. It invites us to become active participants in the detective work of history, weighing the evidence for ourselves and questioning the narratives we've been taught. Whether you're convinced it was an ancient electroplating tool, a priest's mystical device, or an exceptionally well-sealed library for a single sacred scroll, one thing is undeniable. The Baghdad Battery is a testament to the boundless ingenuity of our ancestors. It captures our imagination not because it provides an answer, but because it guards its secret so well. It is an unresolved spark from antiquity, a whisper from a world we can only partially reconstruct. And so, the investigation remains open. What do you think was the true purpose of this fascinating artifact? Do you lean towards the technological breakthrough, the ritual wonder, or the more mundane explanation? Share your own theories and continue the conversation in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of history's most captivating puzzles. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more journeys into the forgotten corners of our past. Until next time, keep questioning.